All right, you filthy animals, gather round, because today we're diving headfirst into a war so goddamn messy it'll make your balls shrivel and your asshole pucker tighter than a nun's you-know-what. We're talking about the Soviet-Japanese War, the one everyone forgets about at the ass end of World War II.
Right you are. While the rest of the world was busy celebrating Hitler's crispy corpse, good old Uncle Joe was over in the East playing a whole different game. The man was all about land grabs and proving his dick was bigger than everyone else's.
Let's cut the crap, though. This war was a bloodbath, a goddamn massacre that made the German invasion of France look like a picnic.
And to really understand the sheer insanity of it all, we gotta go back to the Yalta Agreement. Picture this. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, three dudes with enough power to make Satan shit himself, sitting around a table carving up the world like a Christmas goose. And Stalin, that sneaky bastard, promised to join the party in the Pacific once Hitler kicked the bucket.
But let's be real here. He wasn't doing it out of the kindness of his commie heart. He was eyeing up Manchuria and the Kuril Islands, hell, anything he could get his grubby paws on while everyone else was distracted.
Exactly. The Yalta Agreement was basically Stalin's golden ticket to expand his empire. He was already stacking troops on the Manchurian border, just waiting to pounce on the Japanese like a starving dog on a steak.
Speaking of the Japanese, let's talk about the Kwantung Army. They were supposed to be the badasses of Asia, but by 1945, they were a shell of their former selves, just a bunch of washed-up has-beens clinging to their glory days.
It was a total strategic fuck-up. Japan's bigwigs had been stripping the Kwantung Army bare for years, sending all their best men and equipment to fight in the Pacific. What was left was a bunch of green recruits and rusty rifles.
They were about as prepared for a Soviet invasion as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. It was a complete mismatch, like putting a chihuahua up against a goddamn grizzly bear.
Now picture this. August 9th, 1945, just a few days after the U.S. dropped the A-bomb on Hiroshima. The world still reeling from the nuclear blast, and bam, over 1.5 million Soviet troops come storming out of Siberia like a goddamn tidal wave flooding all over Manchuria.
It was a military masterpiece, a double pincer movement that would make Rommel shit his pants. They hit the Japanese from every direction, west, east, north, like a pack of wolves on a wounded deer.
The speed and brutality of the Soviet advance was unbelievable. They had T-34 tanks, IL-2 Sturmovix raining death from the sky, and enough artillery to flatten Mount Everest. They were a well-oiled war machine fueled by vodka and a burning desire to kick some serious Japanese ass.
And don't forget about the air war. The Soviets had complete control of the skies, turning Manchuria into a shooting gallery. Japanese pilots, most of them barely old enough to shave, were getting blown out of the sky like pigeons.
There are stories of Japanese soldiers strapping explosives to themselves and charging Soviet tanks. Imagine the desperation man strapping a bomb to yourself and running at a goddamn T-34. It was a brutal, chaotic meat grinder, fueled by fear, rage, and a shitload of vodka.
So the Soviets plowed through Manchuria like a bulldozer through a goddamn flower shop, leaving the Japanese wondering what the hell just hit them. But what about the after party? What happened after all the shooting stopped and the vodka wore off?
Well, Stalin wasn't exactly known for his charity work. He saw Manchuria as a giant piggy bank ripe for the taking. Factories stripped bare, industries dismantled, anything worth a damn was shipped off to rebuild the Soviet Union. It was a goddamn fire sale with Stalin as the greedy bastard running the show.
Those commie sons of bitches were efficient, I'll give them that. They sucked Manchuria dry like a goddamn vampire, leaving behind a hollowed-out husk. But what about all the Japanese folks caught in the middle? Did they get a free ticket back home, or what?
More like a one-way ticket to hell, my friend. Millions of Japanese colonists were stranded in Manchuria, facing a future bleaker than a nun's underpants. Forced labor violence deportation. It was a humanitarian shitstorm of epic proportions.
So basically, they got fucked over twice. First by their own government, and then by the Soviets. Talk about a double whammy. It's enough to make you want to drown your sorrows in a bottle of vodka.
And let's not forget about Korea, the geopolitical football that got kicked around in this whole mess. Stalin, that crafty bastard, decided to draw a line right down the middle at the 38th parallel, splitting the country in two.
Yeah, I can see that you Americans take the South, we'll take the North, and let's see how much chaos we can create.
A recipe for disaster, my friend. It set the stage for the Korean War just a few years down the road. But before we get into that whole shitstorm, we gotta address the elephant in the room. Japan's surrender.
Ah, yes, the grand finale. Did the Soviets steamrolling through Manchuria force Japan to wave the white flag, or were those atomic bombs the real knockout punch? It's a debate that's been raging for decades, and we're not going to settle it here. But let's dissect this fucker like a frog in biology class, shall we?
The atomic bombs were absolutely devastating, a 1-2 punch that knocked the wind out of Japan. But some historians argue that the Soviet invasion was the final nail in the coffin, the thing that shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution.
They were screwed from every angle caught between the American nukes and the Soviet steamroller. Their empire was collapsing, their military was in shambles, and their options were disappearing faster than a hooker's virginity.
The Soviet invasion took away any chance of using Stalin as a middleman in peace talks. It was a big fuck you to the world, showing that the Soviets were going to take their piece of the pie no matter what.
It was a clusterfuck of epic proportions for the Japanese. They were cornered with nowhere to run, facing annihilation from all sides. Surrender was the only way out, even if it meant swallowing their pride and kissing their empire goodbye.
And on August 15th, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender, bringing World War II to a screeching halt. But the fallout from that conflict would echo for decades, shaping the future of East Asia and leaving scars that still haven't healed.
Speaking of scars, let's talk about those goddamn Kuril Islands, a chain of volcanic rocks that have been a source of tension between Russia and Japan since the war ended. What's the deal with those things? Why are they such a goddamn geopolitical hot potato?
Picture this. A volcanic archipelago stretching between Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan, and the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. Strategically important, geologically fascinating, and a constant pain in the ass for diplomats.
So basically a bunch of worthless rocks in the middle of nowhere that suddenly became prime real estate when the Soviets grabbed them. And why are these two countries still fighting over like a couple of old ladies over a parking spot? It's been like 70 years for fuck's sake. Get over it.
It's not that simple, my friend. The Soviets took the Kurils at the end of the war, and they've been holding on to them ever since. But Japan has never accepted their claims, seeing it as a land grab, pure and simple.
So it's all about historical grudges and national pride, huh? A pissing contest over who gets to claim a bunch of volcanic pimples in the sea.
There's more to it than just pride. Controlling the Kurils gives Russia a strategic advantage in the Sea of Okhotsk, where they have a nice little submarine base. It's all about flexing their muscles and keeping those American warships at bay.
Ah, so it's a game of naval cat and mouse with the Kurils as the cheese in the middle. And I bet those Russian subs are lurking down there, loaded with enough nukes to turn Tokyo into a radioactive sushi platter.
The Kuril Islands dispute is a perfect example of the bigger power struggle between Russia and the West. It's a reminder that the ghosts of World War II are still haunting us.
Speaking of ghosts, what about those poor Japanese colonists we talked about earlier? The ones who got screwed over and left behind in Manchuria. What the hell happened to those unlucky bastards? All right, so let's talk about those poor saps left stranded in Manchuria. I mean, they got screwed by their own government during the war, and then the Soviets came in and kicked them while they were down. What happened to those folks? Did they get shipped back to Japan, or were they just left to rot in some gulag?
It was a goddamn mess. Imagine being a Japanese colonist in Manchuria in '45. Your world's already gone to shit, and then the Soviets show up with a whole new set of problems.
Yeah, the commies weren't exactly known for their hospitality. So what'd they do with all those Japanese civilians? Round them up and ship them back to Japan?
Yeah, it was way more complicated and way more brutal. The Soviets were busy grabbing anything they could get their hands on, factories, resources, the whole 9 yards. Those Japanese colonists were basically an afterthought.
So they just got tossed aside like a used condom. I bet Stalin didn't lose a wink of sleep over those poor bastards.
A lot of them got sent to labor camps, working their asses off in horrible conditions. Disease was spreading like wildfire, food was scarce, and those Siberian winters were brutal. It was a living hell.
Fuck, man. Imagine being stuck in some frozen wasteland, busting your ass for those commie bastards and wondering if you'll ever see your family again.
And even for the ones who made it out of the camps, it wasn't over. They ended up scattered all over China and the Soviet Union refugees in a world that didn't want them.
It's a goddamn tragedy. Abandoned by their own government, abused by the Soviets, and then left to fend for themselves. Makes you wonder if humanity's got a snowball's chance in hell.
But even in all that darkness, there were some glimmers of hope. Some of those Japanese colonists managed to rebuild their lives, found new communities, and made a new start.
So even when everything's fucked, there's always a chance to bounce back, huh? It's a testament to the human spirit that we can survive even the worst shit life throws at us.
The Soviet-Japanese War might be forgotten by a lot of folks, but it left a big mark on East Asia and the lives of countless people. It's a story of political games, military power, and the human cost of war.
Well, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into this brutal and often overlooked conflict. We covered it all, from Stalin's sneaky land grabs to the tragic fate of those Japanese colonists caught in the crossfire. It just goes to show you, even those small wars can have huge consequences, shaping the destinies of nations and leaving scars that last for generations. So next time you're reading about history, spare a thought for the Soviet-Japanese War and the people who lived through it. It's a story worth remembering, even if it makes you want to chug a bottle of vodka and question the sanity of the human race. Cheers to you all, you magnificent bastards.